Can we please start taking your seat? We will try to start the next session. Por favor, si pueden tomar sus asientos, vamos a intentar empezar la próxima sesión. Je vous prie de bien vouloir vous asseoir. Merci. Et appelez les gens à l'extérieur, ceux qui sont près de la porte. John? Please call on people and let's start the session. Okay, I need the rest of the panel to join us. Good morning, buenos dias, bonjour, sabah al-khair. Ladies and gentlemen, it is truly a pleasure to see us all gathered here this week to celebrate a very special anniversary, that of the IUCN Center for Mediterranean Cooperation. My name is Imen Milien. I'm a vice president of IUCN. And for those who know me, you know that this is where I started my journey with IUCN 20 years ago now. And so it's truly an honor for me to moderate this first dialogue on regional cooperation and nature conservation in the Mediterranean, which is the very raison d'être of the IUCN Mediterranean Center. The Mediterranean, it's a very special sea. It's the cradle of many civilizations. But I wonder how many of us have stopped for a moment to recall what the Mediterranean word means. The Mediterranean Sea means the sea in the middle of the land. And that sea is a great connector of people, of cultures, and for us especially today, it is a connector of nature. En el español se ponen en el canal 4, por favor. No, para nada. I will provide I'll be a headache for the translators because I will be switching in the language. We have a panel that speaks various languages, so. Okay. So I was saying that the Mediterranean Sea is a great connector of people, of culture, and for us particularly today, it is a connector of nature. And in our field of conservation, we talk a lot about connectivity, and the Mediterranean really crystallizes that. The Mediterranean region is one of the world's hotspots for biodiversity, both marine and terrestrial, and the Mediterranean climate and its natural resources are the backbone of its socioeconomic development. But the Mediterranean Sea also connects problems. The region is a globally important trade hub, host to 30% of the global trade and 20% of the global maritime traffic. And a lot of issues come along with these ships, from pollutions to invasive species and so on. The region is attractive because of its Mediterranean climate, and that also brings challenges. It's a highly populated area with over 7% of the world population, a main destination of global tourism with over 300 million tourists recorded in 2017, and it's also a key route for global migration with over 2 million migrants over the past 5 years. So, being a sea in the middle of the land, the Mediterranean doesn't have much of a breathing room, and so things get accumulated, especially pollution and plastic pollution in particular, which we're starting to grapple with. So these risks and challenges exert considerable pressures on the natural environment and require shared and collective answer. And this is why cooperation is paramount. There are already several regional cooperation initiatives in place in the Mediterranean, particularly through the Barcelona Convention, the Union for the Mediterranean, and several more specialized instruments like ACOBAMS, the Agreement for Conservation of Cetaceans. What we want to do today is to take stock of the state of regional cooperations programs already in the Mediterranean and their impact on public policies and on conservation. And I hope we can have an honest and candid, unfiltered, if possible, discussion of what works, what doesn't, where do we see challenges, what are the obstacles that we need to tackle more pressingly, and where do we see opportunities. But we don't want to dwell too much on the past, because looking ahead over the next few years, particularly towards 2030 and beyond, the nature and intensity of the challenges and risks are also increasing in the region, and particularly climate change. In particular, it's going to be threatening the very nature of the Mediterranean. The very famous Mediterranean climate may no longer be, as the region is warming 20% faster than the global average. And it's important to know that these risks and challenges are raising further awareness on the urgency to increase cooperation and dialogue, in particular around the commitments to address this dual crisis of biodiversity loss and climate change that the Vice President of Spain have crystallized very well in her opening speech. So we want to look ahead, bearing in mind the international developments towards the 2030 milestone, the upcoming CBD COP, but most importantly, and I have Egypt at my left, the upcoming COP27 on climate change, which is going to be happening in the Mediterranean. So I think that's a very important step. It is in the Red Sea, but I consider Egypt as part of the Mediterranean. Yes, it is the same basin. So in this region, we see commitments and a mutual interest for finding common solutions, and that's what we want to focus on today. So with us, we have a great panel from various perspectives, so let me start by introducing them. I will start from right to left, and it's not how my notes are organized, so bear with me. So I have Mr. Fernando Magdaleno, who's currently the Deputy Director of Terrestrial and Marine Biodiversity in the Ministry of Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge in Spain. I really like the name of your ministry, because I think it crystallizes what we need to do. So he has over 2 decades of experience in various Spanish environmental authorities. He's also a prolific writer and has come with a science background, has written peer-reviewed paper, and I like that science to policy connection, and I hope that you provide some insights for that. Ms. Zuhur Methenem Hileli, who's the Chief of Cabinet in the Ministry of Environment in Tunisia. She also has a technical background because she's an engineer by training, and she has 22 years of experience in landscape managing and has been acting as Director General in directorates within the ministry for a long time. So I think that also provides us an experience from the southern Mediterranean. We have Mr. Almotaz Abadi, who's the Deputy Secretary General in the Union for the Mediterranean, in charge of water, environment, and blue economy. And you've led several initiatives to revitalize the water political process in the Mediterranean, including achieving a ministerial declaration and approving a regional water strategy. And before that, you were the Director General of Aid and Cooperation and Management Unit in the government of Palestine in the water-related sector. And I think water is one of the biggest challenges of the Mediterranean, so very glad to have your perspective. Next to Almotaz is Elias Mavroidis, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Elias. He's the Program Management Officer in the UNEP Mediterranean Action Plan with the Barcelona Convention Secretariat, responsible of governance issues, including collaboration with partners, and he has a long experience in environmental management, sustainable development, also bridging the science policy. Next to Elias is Ms. Susana Salvador, who's the Executive Secretary of ACOBAMS, which is the Agreement on Conservation of Cetacean of the Black Sea and Mediterranean Sea and contiguous Atlantic area. That speaks of connectivity. She leads the activity and work priorities defined by the member countries in order to enhance knowledge about cetacean, reduce the anthropogenic threat, and to improve the conservation state of these flagship species in that geographical area. Last but not least, and if he stops filming me, is Nizar Yousefhani, who is the regional vice chair of one of the IUCN commissions. We've heard about IUCN commissions, but here we have an example, and that is the World Commission on Protected Areas, WCPA. Nizar is also the manager of the Shuf Biosphere Reserve in one really particular place. We've heard earlier in the opening speech that the concept of sustainable development is a little bit fuzzy and it's very hard to realize. They did it, and if you don't believe me, go and visit them. So great to have a perspective from the ground, Nizar. So without further ado, I've asked the panelists to reflect on one first question, and that is, do you consider that the regional cooperation programs that we currently have, the Union for the Mediterranean, the Barcelona Convention, ECOBAMS and others, are providing enough support to tackle the challenges of biodiversity loss and climate change crisis? And if not, then what is lacking? So I want to start first by hearing perhaps from the two institutions, the Union for the Mediterranean and then the Barcelona Convention, then the ECOBAMS, and then hear back from the countries and from the ground. So Almota, if you can please start.
I am going to speak on English. Okay, thank you. And tell me if I will be speaking fast. Make me slow down. Thank you. This is very good.
Para español, Canal 1.
En español, Canal 1, por favor. Okay, thank you very much. I am very pleased to be here with you in this occasion of celebrating 20 years anniversary of IUCN, and this is an effort that we at the Union for the Mediterranean are very happy to be always partnering with IUCN in all regions, and we have a special relation with the one on the Mediterranean because we are the Union for the Mediterranean. Absolutely. To come to your question, we are an organization that it's unique about the cooperation and coordination efforts in the Mediterranean, and we bring around the table all entities from governmental to non-governmental, civil society, as well as the regional and sub-regional actors in order to agree on certain elements at different levels. The first level is the political one, where we translate our agreement into a declaration that absolutely one of the things that I see maybe it is a need to be worked on and to strengthen to make those declarations legally binding. Absolutely, they are not legally binding, but they are giving the needed political will from the highest level of water, as an example, Minister of Water, Minister of Environment or Ecological Transition, and all other sectors. I want to focus only on my three sectors that I am working on, the water, environment, and blue economy. And these element of political will is very important in the region because all of these programs, cooperation programs, they need this political will. And my organization is always working to ensure this political will. Even we are sitting on a very conflicting region. I am coming from the state of Palestine, and we have many conflicts, but we acknowledge the fact that it's time to depoliticize these sectors. We need to depoliticize the water, the environment, the blue economy, and to follow what we call it the policy and scientific-based approach, as our great friend here will be talking about it. This is the needed at this time. So translating this political will at other level, where we manage to do what we call it platform of dialogue. And the platform of dialogue is not to bring people around the table in Málaga or in Barcelona or in Tunisia or in Amman. No, it is to give the ownership for those people to develop these elements, to develop this strategy, and to develop the how to approximate between different countries. Our objective at the Union for the Mediterranean will not be to unify strategies because it's very complicated. Our objective is to approximate in order to protect this ecosystem in the land and in the sea, because we believe if we wanted to conserve, we need to restore at the land. If we wanted to conserve the land, we need also to restore in the sea. And this is what we call it was translated just in June, July, source to the sea approach. And this is the second element that we make sure that around the table, it is not only the government sit. It is absolutely, we are intergovernmental organization, we have a set of rules, but we follow what we call it the whole governmental approach and the whole society approach to bring this debate and to develop these elements, and then we give them a political will, translated into partnership. The conservation and the restoration of our biodiversity cannot be done individually. You cannot have a country that applies strict regulation and another country around the Mediterranean, they don't apply any regulation. Because if you clean here and make dirty here, you are not cleaning at all. So this is the partnership away from the political will and the declaration between government is to build the families around the Mediterranean on an equal basis. We have a very good examples in the Mediterranean. Many countries had managed to overcome this biodiversity loss. I know that, just give me 1 minute. And also we are living, as said, I don't want to repeat, we have not climate change problem, we have a climate emergency. And we were saying that 180 million people living in the Mediterranean with lack of shortage of water. And now, the climate change is translated here not like in the North Pole. It is melting of glacier. Here is hot wave and low water. And that means is the biodiversity will be at risk. So the main objective here is to look after the hand in hand, the development, which is, I call it not the progressive development. We need to look at the sustainable development and respecting the ecosystem and build the nexus between climate change and biodiversity loss. Climate change cannot be addressed if we keep water silos, energy silos, environment and food silos. We have to build nexus around these in order to respect, and this happened with the partnership like UNIPMAP, with all other actors around the Mediterranean from the south and the north. Thank you.
Al-Motaz, I didn't want to interrupt because I think that the question of climate change is really important, and it's a challenge that's going to be challenging the nature of the Mediterranean. You know, it's going to touch at the heart of everything. So I want to come back to that and give the opportunity to dive a little bit deeper, because these points are very important. And I think your point on political wills, you told us what you're doing, and it's at the heart of it. I'm wondering how well you're doing, but we'll come back to that later if you can give us perspective. So let me pass it on to the Barcelona Convention and tell us more about where you see things.
Thank you, Iman, and congratulations to UICN for this celebration, and thanks for inviting us here. Yes, indeed, regarding your question, I think that multilateral environmental agreements, okay, the Barcelona Convention's protocol is one of them, so we are both a legally binding and institutional framework, have played an important role. Since the 70s that were established, I think they have helped both in fostering cooperation and in protecting the environment in the region. However, we all know, and we've seen also through recent assessment reports like the State of the Environment Development Report that was produced in 2020, like the report of the Mediterranean Experts on Environment and Climate Change, MEDEC, that we are working together with UFM on. They have shown that things are deteriorating in the environment of the Mediterranean, and that we need to have a strengthened response, and what we say in UNEP-MAP, we need a green renaissance in the Mediterranean, especially in this post-COVID era, and we need to have the economies working in a more sustainable ground. And this will bring me directly to the second part of the question, which is where we need to focus. And we believe that the full implementation of the obligations of the Barcelona Convention and its protocols by the contracting parties, by the 21 countries of the Mediterranean and the European Union, is crucial to achieve this green renaissance. Our focus, after almost 5 decades of maturing this legal and institutional framework, which is one of the most complete in the regional seas around the world, and it's kind of an example for other regional seas within the United Nations Environment Programme, is to focus on this enforcement and implementation to launch a national recovery. We have this framework also through the compliance committee that is under the Barcelona Convention, so we need to focus now on implementation and enforcement. And of course, we cannot have implementation if we don't strengthen two other pillars. One of them is the building of capacities within the countries, and especially the countries in the south of the Mediterranean. And the second one is the strengthening of partnerships. And we have worked together and we are partnering formally and informally with many of the organizations here, IUCN, MED at first, UFM, ACOBAMS, GFCM, the General Fisheries Commission of the Mediterranean, who I think are also here tomorrow. So we believe that we need to strengthen this. We also have the Mediterranean Commission of Sustainable Development, and which is a body that brings an equal footing both countries and partners. It also helps in translating global commitments like the SDGs at the regional level. So what we need is a fundamental reorganization to abandon these unsustainable paths of development and have a systemic switch. And for this, we don't need half-hearted decisions, and we need both the legally binding framework being implemented. We need the institutions who work in an organized manner, and we need to strengthen our partnerships and look at the complementarities that the different organizations have. So in one word, I think we need to move from planning and commitment to widespread implementation and effective enforcement through partnerships. Thank you.
Thanks, Elias. And you've mentioned the legally binding framework. I want to come back to that a little bit later. Susanna, if you can give us a status of where we are with ACOBAMS and marine conservation, because you're the marine person here.
Thank you so very much, Iman. It's an honor to be here with you, to have the opportunity to celebrate the history of success of IUCN. You are a huge and important partner to ACOBAMS. We have been working together. We have been doing great things. And in spite of all challenges ahead and obstacles, we have been able to respond to to mitigate some of the negative effects in the Mediterranean. So as you so kindly described, ACOBAMS is a legally binding instrument formed of 24 countries around the Mediterranean, but also the Black Sea. And our mission is to focus on the conservation of cetaceans. So it's a very particular mandate that we have. And in doing that, of course, we need to understand the status of conservation of those animals, and there are 14 species in the Mediterranean and 3 specific subspecies in the Black Sea. So the Mediterranean hosts a lot of biodiversity, and in particular of cetaceans. These animals are very important. The Mediterranean is a very important habitat for these animals, and of course climate change will play also potentially devastating effects in terms of the distribution and abundance of these animals that of course will have to adapt to these anthropogenic, and the climate change, which is a cause and a consequence of human activities, and it will have a very huge impact. But just to summarize, thanks to the mobilization of 24 countries, ACOBAMS is striving to understand the status, the biological status of these animals, but alongside what are the threats that are impacting those animals. So the countries are committed to reduce human pressures put on these animals and to better understand and to have measures in place that are efficient in terms of protecting and avoiding biodiversity loss as possible.
Thank you. I think that's a great overview of what you're doing. So I want to turn back to the countries and hear perhaps from Spain and then from Tunisia. We've heard from the regional programs, what is it that they're doing, some of their perspectives. For you, is it enough? Are they providing supports? Are they not? What, like, tell me more and be candid.
Are you going to speak in
Spanish, in Español. Then the lady will speak in French. Just.
Ahora, ¿sí? Bien, muchas gracias, Imen, por supuesto, por la presentación, por la invitación para estar aquí hoy y enhorabuena, por supuesto, a UICN, que sois y somos todos, ¿no? Somos muchos, ¿no? Y, por supuesto, mi enhorabuena por este trabajo realizado, como decía la vicepresidenta esta mañana. En cuanto a la pregunta que nos planteas, evidentemente estamos hablando del Mediterráneo, de la cuenca mediterránea, que es uno de los espacios de mayor diversidad biológica, social y política que hay en el mundo. Esa diversidad que es bio, que es socio, que es política, genera un ambiente especialmente rico en matices, rico en objetivos de conservación y nos obliga a un enfoque absolutamente territorial. Es imprescindible que las herramientas de cooperación regional que están aprobadas y en marcha son una condición necesaria, pero seguramente no suficiente para alcanzar los objetivos que tienen comprometidos. Son una herramienta, son un apoyo que permite que haya un marco estable de cooperación, un marco estable para compartir objetivos geopolíticos, pero sin duda es imprescindible que trasciendan, que permeen hacia las normativas nacionales, sectoriales y hacia las herramientas que en el fondo definen el manejo territorial. De otra manera, si no integramos las políticas derivadas de esos programas de cooperación con las políticas sectoriales y territoriales, es muy complicado que sea suficiente el marco que nos autoasignamos para conseguir los objetivos que en el fondo persiguen. Por tanto, para mí, siendo muy esquemático en esta respuesta, es, creo, un marco muy positivo que ha madurado, que habla de madurez social, de madurez política, habla de una cooperación estable en el tiempo y en el espacio, pero que seguramente no es suficiente si queremos que los matices socioambientales tan variados que tenemos en el Mediterráneo lleguen a convertirse en esa solución final que queremos para obtener los compromisos y realidades tangibles que nos queremos autoasignar. Y finalmente, como última quizá frase, es el hecho de que también perseguimos, por supuesto, compromisos y cambios tangibles, no solamente marcos de cooperación, que son, como digo, muy positivos, pero perseguimos compromisos, como esta mañana manifestaba la vicepresidenta, tangibles en cuanto a conservación, en cuanto a regulación, no limitación per se de actividades humanas, sino una regulación que permita esa armonización, ese equilibrio entre conservación de los valores múltiples y absolutamente riquísimos que estamos manejando y el desarrollo de actividades humanas que también deben, por supuesto, seguir funcionando. Así que hablamos siempre de un encuentro, no de una cuestión que vaya polarizándose desde un lado que sea a lo mejor basado en la existencia de compromisos regionales o nacionales y unas actividades humanas que se vean amenazadas, sino un marco de cooperación que tenga un sustento de conocimiento científico, un sustento de cooperación y colaboración que al final nos lleve a la confianza, confianza sin la cual va a ser muy complicado que esas herramientas de cooperación u otras que nos impongamos finalmente contribuyan al objetivo que persiguen. Así que para mí, integración sectorial y normativa, conocimiento como base, cooperación y un enfoque territorial que realmente haga que haya una fusión de ese marco con los objetivos que en la práctica luego están en el día a día de las personas que viven en el territorio. No podemos legislar y manejar fuera o alejados de esa visión territorial, local, que luego la gente recibe en su día a día y sin la cual llegaremos seguramente muy corto en el espacio.
Thank you, Fernando. Gracias. I think there is a lot packed in that reflection. I think it's quite a deep reflection, and I thank you for that. Today is the first panel. We're going to be continuing talking over the next couple of days, so it's just the start of the conversation. But I think that the 3 points that you put there are important. And the first one in particular, as we move towards the international agreements, the question of mainstreaming of the socioeconomic and biodiversity and bridging that together. I mean, we've been talking about mainstreaming for years, and we still haven't really managed to get it right in a way that's functioning. That's still a question open there. I hope that we can talk a little bit more about it over the next couple of days. Madame Zuhur, on va passer en français maintenant. Et je vais passer la parole à un moment. Et vous me decirme el canal del francés, por favor. L'espagnol, espagnol 1, français 4, anglais 3. Si on change, on vous dit. Et Madame Zuhur, qui est chef de cabinet, je rappelle, du ministère de l'Environnement de la Tunisie, je vous donne la parole.
Merci. Bonjour tout le monde. Je suis très heureuse et très ravie d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui. Merci à l'UICN pour l'aimable invitation. Merci à toi aussi, Imen. Alors, en réponse à votre question, à mon sens, la coopération, l'échange et la solidarité dans l'écorégion de la Méditerranée est l'une des exemples et leçons réussis pour les autres régions du monde. Je considère que la Convention de Barcelone, appuyée par les instruments techniques et financiers mis en place par l'Union européenne, tels que l'instrument européen de voisinage uni, par exemple, et les autres bailleurs de fonds, constituent ensemble un arsenal juridique, technique, scientifique, administratif et financier le plus étoffé de tous les autres instruments régionaux, voire même globaux. Bien que, dois-je le mentionner dans ce panel, l'enveloppe du soutien régional reste toujours en dessous des objectifs et des ambitions des pays du Sud, dont la Tunisie, bien sûr, pour combler l'écart entre ce qui est souhaitable et ce qui est réalisable. Dans la même lignée des idées sur le plan juridique et technique, la Convention de Barcelone, avec ses 7 protocoles, a enregistré une évolution notable depuis près d'un demi-siècle d'existence, permettant de traiter toutes les problématiques environnementales dans la région. En effet, la Convention de Barcelone de 1976, initialement Convention pour la protection de la mer Méditerranée contre la pollution, et le Plan d'action pour la Méditerranée de 1975, ont évolué pour inclure expressément les dimensions du développement durable, ce que traduit le changement d'intitulé de la Convention et du Plan d'action pour la Méditerranée en 1995. Mais malgré ce progrès, la mer Méditerranée continue sa trajectoire de dégradation. L'heure est venue pour redresser cette trajectoire. Plusieurs options se présentent. Premièrement, si l'on protège tout l'écosystème de la Méditerranée, tellement fragile aux pollutions et différentes menaces, nous aurons contribué à la protection de l'un des plus importants hotspots de la biodiversité mondiale. Dans cette optique, la Convention de Barcelone, à travers son protocole sur les aires spécialement protégées et la biodiversité en Méditerranée, pourra jouer un rôle déterminant dans l'atteinte de cet objectif qui lui-même contribuera substantiellement aux objectifs globaux du cadre mondial sur la biodiversité de l'après-2020. En effet, la création d'aires marines protégées aussi sous la juridiction nationale et au-delà, ainsi que les autres mesures de conservation par zone sont les outils incontournables pour lutter contre toutes les formes de dégradation et asseoir les modèles de développement durable du niveau local jusqu'à niveau national et régional. Sur le plan juridique et réglementaire, il est important de décliner les obligations et réglementations découlant des conventions et cadres réglementaires régionaux en textes contraignants au niveau national. Deuxièmement, au cours de ces derniers quarts du siècle, nous avons vécu des crises sanitaires, environnementales et économiques d'envergure dans la région. Ce constat nous amène à repenser nos modèles de développement et nos modes de production et de consommation vers plus de durabilité en y incluant des approches novatrices comme les solutions fondées sur la nature, les principes de l'économie circulaire, l'économie bleue durable, etc. Voilà, je vous remercie.
Merci, merci Madame Zuhur. I will switch to English. Sure, yes. Thank you. Thank you. I understand that the translation is challenging as you hear it, and it is challenging, but I understand that tomorrow we will be in a better,
Tomorrow we will be working in the booth. So
in booths.
This is not the best for you, not the best for us.
Yes, I understand, but thank you. Thank you for your efforts.
Tomorrow it will be crisp. We will be
Perfect.
crisp on the language. It will be wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you for really. It's not easy for you to work in these conditions, but thank you for providing the service. I know. We're in a beautiful place, and a historical place. It has its challenges, but I prefer to be here. So I just wanted to capture two elements because I think there's some connectivity in what both of you said. I think Madame Zuhur has mentioned an instrument that's relatively new, which is the other effective areas, conservation. No, Nizar is going to hit me on the head, like, what the heck is OECM? Other effective area-based conservation measures, which is a new instrument under the CBD that is areas that are equivalent to protected areas, but they don't have the conservation as their primary objective. They can have a sustainable development as a primary objective, a climate adaptation or mitigation as a primary, but they contribute to biodiversity conservation. And I think that could be a potential where we bring this mainstreaming that you talked about, and because they are area-based conservation areas, then we also bring that territorial level. And I think that could be a really good opportunity to explore, and I'm sure that we'll talk about it more. You also brought, as well as Elias, the question of legally binding instruments, and I want to come back to that. But Nizar, I want to look at you because we've heard from institutions, we've heard from governments, and the civil society is also interesting in it also providing, not so much institutionalized, but other fora for cooperation. And I want to particularly mention the Mediterranean, the Alliance for Mediterranean Nature and Culture, because cultural practices that have shaped the Mediterranean landscape are important. I know you're into this, so curious to tell us more.
Yeah, as you said, Iman, we are in a very nice place, historical place. This is part of the cultural practices of our Mediterranean region. I think the whole Mediterranean region has many common cultural practices, starting with grazing, starting with the traditional agriculture, starting with many other activities, which is very connected with biodiversity conservation. Because I heard very interesting intervention before and now talking about touchable activities and practical activities. And in the protected areas world, we call it practical conservation. If we want to do conservation for the species and conservation for our ecosystem, and that will not reflect direct benefit of the local communities, it will not work. Again, who is in contact with the challenges? Are the people on the ground? Are the people in the field? Are the farmers? Are the shepherds? So I think we need to involve those people in the whole story. Great international cooperation, starting with the CBD and all those conventions. Great regional cooperation and regional initiatives and regional interventions, but we need to reflect that on the ground. So today I will give you a practical example, looking to this connection between cultural practices and biodiversity conservation under the umbrella of MAVA, 13 NGOs and institutions in the Mediterranean region, working together since 2017 in Greece, Spain, Portugal, Lebanon, Morocco, Tunisia, Turkey, and other countries to highlight and to promote the importance of cultural practices and biodiversity conservation, trying to revive in several sites, in 13 sites in the Mediterranean region, the cultural practices. And it works. You mentioned the Shuf Biosphere Reserve. This is a very typical Mediterranean landscape. It works, you know that. It's a green listed protected area, is a good example. In Lebanon, we call the grazing system as himas in Lebanon and the surrounding area. In Morocco, they call it agdal. In Greece, we call it mantra. In Spain, the lowland of Spain and Portugal, we call it dehsas. It's more or less the same, following local practices. It's well known since a very long time ago. The new policies and the new laws sometimes destroyed those local practices. So the main objective of this alliance, as well to work with the local authorities and with the national authorities and the regional authorities, trying to support those local practices by policies and by laws. This is something very practical. This is something benefit, useful for the local communities, for the local authorities, and for the national authorities as well. In numbers, when we tried in this alliance to do some economic value studies and assessment, really we discovered very encouraging number. In some of the sites, one of them is the Shuf, every $1 that we invest is earning $19. And this is in comparison with the national parks in USA, let's say. Every dollar they invest, they earn $10. This is very practical. This is what we need to promote our conservation activities, because this is very useful as well for the decision makers. So nature protection and nature conservation is an investment, not just mega structure and big projects are investment, because all the countries and all the regional initiatives aim to do more development and aim to do more job opportunities. Those are great job opportunities, sustainable job opportunities, and can save people and nature.
Thanks, Nizar, for that very concrete example. And I think the question of reviving local knowledge and local practices, which we have lost. 2 weeks ago, I was in the island of Djerba in the south of Tunisia, and I've visited an Ibadite mosque, which is a subterranean mosque that has the peculiarity of keeping the temperature constant at 20 degrees in winter and in summer, when it was 41 degrees above Earth. And I think we are losing some of these things. No AC whatsoever and no energy needed. And I think this may be, I know that Egypt will be looking at bridging biodiversity and climate agenda at the COP, so that there's more to explore there. I wanted to come back to the question of the legally binding instrument that some of you have mentioned. And I think here's the question. Do we need more of them? Do we need more of the technically elaborating, legally binding instruments, or do we need really more of frameworks that facilitate the political will? And I want to perhaps start with you, Almortaz.
Thank you very much. I am not underestimating the legally binding instruments, but the problem remains how we will assess and how we will monitor this commitment to this binding document. So I rather always support the idea of building the partnership and the framework of agreements between nations and build what I call it the win-win for maybe the competing nation or the nations that they can cooperate, but at the end of the day, each one of us wanted to enhance the socio-economic reality of her or his citizen, and this is something in the Mediterranean. If it will not be coupled with financial cooperation, this will not happen. Yani, all these important document, scientific-based approach document whatsoever, if they were not translated into two things, they will be shelved. The first one, in the national development plans of the individual countries. And the second, they have to be a guiding elements for the development cooperation and the investment arm of any country. Where we work in the Mediterranean, we have witnessed that there are, some of us have money to spend, some of us, they have work to do, but they don't have the money to catalyze. So we focus on this, what we call it North-South cooperation. But the most important part in our framework that we are also doing what we call it South-South cooperation and the triangular cooperation. Here it's very important to emphasize on the fact that with this climate change, the North should start looking at the South. Even they need capacity, but the capacity of managing a crisis is very important. And now we can see how Google Map can show us the yellow part is not only on the southern Mediterranean. The yellow part on the Google Map start coming to Spain, to South Italy. That means that there is a voice you see it, that there is drought and there are intermittent supply start coming to the European cities. Unfortunately, this is the reality. And who is the master on managing this? Is people who lived for 30, 40 years doing this crisis management. As said, we cannot plan without putting on place a good management practices. The framework agreement can bolster something very important, which is learning from each other, but not learning by replicating only the success story. The most important lesson that we can learn is not to do what failed on other country. And we have to minimize the level of spending money on trivial things that fail. The solution for the Mediterranean region from the perspective of regional cooperation is to, again, enhance the partnership, we said, enhance the capacity, but the most important, to put the resources required. Here's the resources, either human resources, capacitate people, as well as to put the financial resources where are needed. And this is the most important, and to work on the sustainability of the investment, promoting the sustainable production and consumption, which is the circular economy in the Mediterranean. I would like to comment on the approach of my great friend. The solution is not only innovation. The innovation is and must, but look back to the history and the good practices of our grandfathers, bringing this technique of irrigation, building the wall by stones and all, protecting the lands. This is how we can, if we couple between the past and look to the future, coupling it with finance. This is the issue. We need also to enhance the efficiency of the taxpayer money in the region. We cannot do it without working on 3 levels. Governance, we have to look after reforms program to put best governance frameworks to the environment or water sector or whatsoever sector. The second one is we need to stop this. The government entity should not manage water. We should not have a government entity managing water supply. We should make commercial non-profit approaches for building utilities, either for environment or water or electricity whatsoever, and those should maximize the internal revenue of this sector. The loss of biodiversity cannot be restored if we don't have the capacity to finance the restoration. So finance it within its own resources. It requires us to start looking for the commercial approaches. Here I am talking about commercial non-profit, very important, because water, environment, public health is a human right, and we need to consider this approach in our cooperation. Thank you.
Thanks. There is a lot packed in that, I think. And I want to come back to you on this commercial approaches, because one thing we didn't talk about is private sector. So I want to come back to you shortly after this. That deserves some time. Let me go to Susanna on this question. Tell me where your perspective lies.
Thank you, Imen. In terms of the legal aspect of the work that we need.
Do we need more legally binding? Do we need more framework, enabling frameworks? Where are the gaps? Are there specific gaps?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. This is a very important question. We all know that we have a patchwork of organizations working with different mandates and very specific ones. So there is a huge challenge, which is to make them collaborate and enter into dialogues that are mutual beneficial, so that common problems or issues may be responded with a common or a collective response. But so in my view, there is two plans of legally binding or legal instruments. There is these legally binding treaties, instruments, agreements like ACOBAMS, which sets the scene for countries to collaborate, also with partners. But there is the second part of this legal work. And I would like to give you an example, for instance, which is the proposal from 4 countries that are also member countries to ACOBAMS, Italy, Spain, France, and Monaco, that are working hard on elaborating a proposal to be submitted to the International Maritime Organization in order to tackle very practical and concrete concern, which is in relation to the high rate of ship collisions with large cetaceans. There is a high mortality of whales, and this is something that needs to be tackled through other legal instruments, such as a measure to be put in place at the level of IMO, so to reduce speed for navigation. And that is the only way, according to specialists and experts and scientists, that will reduce the high rate of mortality related to ship strikes. So this is one thing. That it's without saying that technical work and work on the field is not necessary, quite the contrary, because the legal aspect and the nature of organizations is closely linked to the work in the field. So also I agree with this bottom-up approach that needs to be pursued in order to better understand where the action is needed and tailored to the specificities of the sub-regions, so that we respect the practices that are already in place and we learn from those, so that we tailor the legal interventions, so to say. So I think that is a continued work to be done in terms of legally adaptation to what needs to be done. And in ACOBAMS, for instance, there is also a work, and that's another example of this field work and the legal aspect, which is, for instance, we need to put in place networks of experts that deal with issues like strandings or necropsies. So the countries also need to adopt their national networks that are ready to intervene in case of emergency events. So that's the legal aspect that goes hand in hand with the field work. Thank you.
Thanks, Susanna, because I think you had a very good description of the loop, you know, from the science to the action to the enabling policy, making it legally binding and really feedbacking the loop with the monitoring of the experts and so on. I want to turn to Elias, because we've heard, I mean, we started today, but actually yesterday there were discussions with the IUCN members about some of the challenges, and one of the things we've heard about is the plastic pollution. And this is an area that we're starting to grapple with. It's still nascent. So I know UNEP is active in that. Can you tell us more what we're doing in the Med?
Thank you very much. I think it's a very interesting question, and also from the responses, it's clear that it's more complicated, and I think also my response will be a combination of actions, because also in UNEP map we are thinking about it. An example is the plastic pollution. Look, to respond directly, firstly, to respond directly to the question, in some cases, we do need more technically elaborated or legally binding instruments. I think this was clear in the past couple of decades, for example, with the Minamata Convention. It dealt with a very important issue, which was mercury pollution. And is currently the same case with a new legally binding instrument on plastic pollution, including in the marine environment. And this is very important for us, especially since this instrument will look at the life cycle. So the emphasis on the marine environment is crucial. So yes, we need them sometimes, and we need them based on a robust science. And this also a very important link, science and policy. However, and this is the second part of my response, we should not forget that we already have in the Mediterranean a very robust set of legally binding instruments, including in such issues. For example, we have the regional plan on the management of marine litter in the Mediterranean, which was adopted by the contracting party, the Barcelona Convention, back in 2013 in our COP in Istanbul. And this was the first legally binding instrument worldwide. So it provides for programs of measures and implementation timetable. So what I would say is that sometimes we need new instruments, but new instruments should be linked with the existing ones, so we don't have a proliferation. And secondly, we should not forget that the regional level, the Mediterranean in our case, is a stepping stone between the global level and the national level. And thirdly, as I said, and this comes very close to what Almut has said before, we need to focus on the enforcement on the existing instruments. And this can be done through cooperation like ours, because you don't want the countries to have different obligations for different organizations and instruments. And secondly, we need to focus also on the capacity building and the work on the ground.
Thanks. I think that's a very important point, and thanks for reminding us that the Mediterranean, there was already an existing legally binding agreement on plastic, because sometimes those of us that are more into the negotiations, we're in the heat of that, and the negotiators say something, and sometimes you go back to the country, to the person that needs to implement, and they look at them like, you know, and then we have to create harmonization, cooperation between the instruments, and just like each one of them will require finance and a focal point, and the burden of that from the country's perspective into implementation. I want to hear more about how you feel it sitting in the countries. So let's start with Madame Zuhur.
Alors, je pense que nous avons déjà développé un ensemble très important de cadres juridiques au niveau mondial, régional, mais aussi au niveau national durant les 50 dernières années. Nous avons compris au fil du temps que nous devons changer nos modes vis-à-vis de l'environnement et de ressources naturelles d'une façon générale. Le problème réside dans la mise en œuvre des instruments et des engagements existants. Nous avons accompli des progrès considérables à cet égard dans le cadre de la Convention surtout de Barcelone et de la Commission méditerranéenne de développement durable, CMDD. Nous devons progresser ensemble et ne laisser personne derrière en comblant toutes les lacunes les plus prédominantes dans la région, à savoir les écarts nord-sud, concrétisation des volontés politiques, mobilisation des moyens financiers et humains suffisants, implication de tous les acteurs à tous les niveaux, ainsi que le transfert de la technologie. Voilà.
Merci, Madame Zuhur. I want to turn to you, Fernando. Sí, perdón, que les estamos cambiando. Gracias.
Bueno, Gracias por la pregunta. Sin duda, estamos enlazando aspectos que empiezan a encontrarse, ¿no?, a mezclarse, que son extremadamente interesantes. Tenemos en el Mediterráneo, antes lo decíamos, estamos en un medio físico, un medio ambiental y social que es muy complejo y que nos obliga a esa gobernanza de la complejidad. La gobernanza es un término que todos utilizamos en el día a día, que está incluso avalado por agencias internacionales como la OCDE, que tiene programas de gobernanza, ¿no?, expresamente para intentar darnos herramientas a los países para poder mejorar ese manejo de la diversidad y gobernar mejor esa heterogeneidad que manejamos. Y esa complejidad ha ido generando, en el caso de Europa, en la margen norte del Mediterráneo, una abundante cantidad de normas, de leyes, una hiperregulación que es entendible, es necesaria para poder abordar semejantes retos con garantías. Primero fue una regulación un tanto quizá vacilante, en el sentido de que iba llegando en función de necesidades puntuales que afloraban debido a problemas ambientales que todos recordamos de los años 70, 80, 90, y posteriormente se ha ido completando con otras regulaciones que han ido dando respuesta a otras cuestiones, desafíos, retos que se iban produciendo. Pero eso ha generado un aparato normativo extremadamente grande. Tenemos, en el caso de España, hasta 20 leyes ambientales que regulan los temas medioambientales. No hablemos de reglamentos, de normativas, sumemos todas las directivas europeas, reglamentos, comunicaciones, decisiones, acuerdos regionales. Y esto es un entramado normativo que debe seguirse mejorando y apuntalando allí donde haga falta mejorarlo, pero que es muy complejo de manejar, tanto por los aquí presentes, incluso siendo nosotros todos los presentes personas del ámbito de la conservación en general, como no imaginemos para la población que al final no tiene realmente una cercanía emocional a semejante cuerpo normativo. Esta cuestión nos obliga a ser extremadamente cuidadosos e inteligentes en la manera de manejar un aparato normativo que puede ser visto como una amenaza para la población que hace, como decíamos antes, uso del territorio. Esa amenaza difusa que estamos sintiendo o que siente sobre todo Europa Occidental es una amenaza difusa que también viene de la mano de esa regulación que algunos sectores poblacionales entienden como una potencial limitación a las actividades humanas tradicionales que desarrollan. Y que es un caldo de cultivo muy fácil para otros mensajes más simples, más viscerales, más polarizados, más basados en el odio, en la tensión, que encuentran un fácil rédito político electoral, tal y como estamos viendo incluso últimamente en las elecciones recientes, que no hace falta que comente, o las que estén por llegar en el futuro cercano y que también ocurrieron en Estados Unidos y en otras regiones del globo. Por tanto, creo que es importante apuntalar ese marco normativo con aquellos elementos que aún sea necesario mejorar a escala internacional, europea, mediterránea, nacional, pero también tenemos que ser capaces, las administraciones, de comunicar mejor qué significa, comunicar mejor que no es una amenaza potencial directa hacia las actividades humanas tradicionales y ser capaces de vender mejor, ¿no?, lo que supone de mejora para el bienestar humano y hacer ver que, desde luego, un sistema ambientalmente colapsado, tal como estamos viendo en diferentes casos en la cuenca del Mediterráneo, conduce a un colapso también socioeconómico y sociocultural. De manera que no es el argumento, no es, digamos, la respuesta el incrementar la tensión sobre los sistemas socioambientales, sino mejorar ese marco normativo y, sobre todo, explicar mucho más lo que contiene para ganar esa confianza que sin ella, como digo, es complicado que nos entiendan, que no se incremente la polarización, la tensión social y que no acabe siendo como reacción o contrarreacción a ese marco que tiene un objetivo bondadoso en origen, pero mal entendido y mal recibido, puede dar la vuelta completamente y avalar unas políticas y unos cambios sociopolíticos que son justamente quizá un tumor por venir hacia ese intento que hemos tenido de mejorar mucho la conservación. Así que otra vez vuelvo un poco al argumento de la pregunta 1 y de la 2 con la 4. Mejor conocimiento, mayor cooperación, mayor comunicación y hacia la mayor confianza.
Gracias. Es un punto muy importante, creo, y es uno que me permite pasar o volver al sector privado. porque uno de los sectores que ve las normativas como una amenaza, como lo has dicho, es el sector privado. Y un sector de los sectores que es importante en el Mediterráneo es el del turismo, porque en el turismo muchos de los países, el mío primero, han apostado a un turismo de masa, a un turismo industrial que no es muy compatible. Le voy a dar tiempo para que tome un poco de agua. Que no es muy compatible con la naturaleza o que puede tener estos retos. Pero la perspectiva del sector privado o trabajar con el sector privado y traerles a hacer normativas o quizás normativas soft, o sea, normativas voluntarias, a trabajar juntos de la mano para mejorar la conservación y mejorar, integrar la naturaleza en la gestión de su día a día, de su sector, es una oportunidad. Yo sé que Nizar ha trabajado en este tema y nos podría dar un ejemplo concreto de cómo lo podemos hacer.
Great. Another good example. Really, thank you. Very encouraging. What I heard from all of you, mainly from Fernando at the end. Tourism is a problem. All of us, we know, for all the challenges that we are talking about. Ecotourism is an alternative, which is very connected to the protected areas and very connected to the conserved areas. Coming back a little bit to the definition of the ecotourism, we have three principles. First, we need to support nature conservation. Any tourist visiting a protected area should pay entrance fee, should pay for a service, whatever, to support nature conservation. We should support local communities by using the services nearby the protected areas, buying the local products, and so on. Third, raise awareness for the tourists about nature protection. We say every single visitor for the protected area should leave with a story to implement that in his own land, in his own country, in his own village, wherever. So another initiative started in 2013. IUCN Med Office was one of those organizations. Feder Parki. We have partners from 10 Mediterranean countries, Jordan, Greece, France, Spain, Italy, and Lebanon. Work together on what we call it Mediterranean experience of ecotourism, which is promoting the whole Mediterranean region as a destination for ecotourism, for ecological activities, different than the mass tourism and the sea and the normal tourism that we know in the Mediterranean region. The network worked with many protected areas. Now they are part of the network. And we developed a kind of ecotourism catalog. And we promoted this catalog for the international travel agencies, mainly for the overseas visitors who are coming from all over the world to come and to spend 2 weeks, 3 weeks in the Mediterranean region, moving from a country to another. And the impact of the ecotourism packages that has been developed has minimum impact on the environment. The food should be linked to the local production. The transportation should be environmental friendly transportation with the minimum transportation using the classical transportation means and tools and so on. So this is as well a win-win situation that you're supporting communities, you're supporting nature conservation, you are providing a unique, different experience for the visitors because always the ecotourism is something different than going in a bus and moving from a place to another and getting the classical information that you can get it from books or internet or whatever. In 2018, this project that was funded by European Union through ENI program, becoming an association. We call it Mediterranean Experience of Ecotourism Association. It's hosted by IUCN Mediterranean Office and has many, many members. Always should be linked to protected areas or conserved areas to be able to implement a real and correct ecotourism activities. So this is another good example. Everyone in this room, if you are connected to protected areas or you're managing protected areas, are invited to join this group of people, and maybe this is one of the alternatives to minimize the impact of the mass tourism on our Mediterranean basin.
Thanks, Nizar. And I think that also brings this public-private partnership to increase financing and investment. Please, Susanna.
Thank you very much. This was very interesting, and this brings me to another example, which I'd like to inform you about, which is the high quality whale watching label, which is a label of ACOBAM's and Pelagos agreement. And talking about tourism and ecotourism, it just reminds me of the importance of, while doing that, and of course the cetacean observation is becoming increasingly an activity that is of interest to the general public, but there is this certification process in the framework of this label, which is that attributes the label to operators that respect the cetaceans' life and conservation, because in spite of the interest of observing cetaceans, there are still wild animals, and people sometimes they say, okay, we observe them, but there is a lot of waters in the maritime space, and they can go elsewhere. But we need to keep in mind that there are their natural habitats that they use for breeding, for feeding, for reproducing, for socializing, and that if we chase those animals, we can cause disturbance and harassment. So even if this is a very good activity that may increase awareness about cetaceans' lives, because these are majestic animals, and we can also get to the public in terms of what their needs are, we also need to be respectful towards these wild animals while doing that. So that's just the example that I wanted to bring to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Susanna. I wasn't aware of it, actually, so thank you for bringing it. And I think this is a nice complementary marine terrestrial example. I wanted to come back to Mr. Abadi, Liano. You actually are working at a bigger scale. We've heard a couple of examples that are more on a smaller scales of ecotourism and you know, small providers and so on. But you're working at, like, from your perspective and the work that you're doing, some of the obstacles to actually collaborate on foster regional collaboration with the private sector and bringing them on board, I'd like to hear a little bit more from you. But before, I just want to advise our panelists that I will then be moving to closing remarks and thanking you to focus on, you know, looking ahead, 1, 2, 3 things maximum. So you only have like 1 minute, looking ahead the main priority. So prepare your closing remarks while Mr. Abadi gives his answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. But to understand the question is related to only ecotourism or in general?
No, sir. No,
Okay,
no. It
thank
is
you.
the challenges for fostering cooperation with the private sector.
Yeah, as I said before, that the element of private sector is challenging in the Mediterranean, and when we look at the blue economy or environment, biodiversity or water sector, those sectors are not so attractive for the private sector because they cannot see the added value or the return of their investment in a very proper way. At the same time, there is no sound regulatory framework to regulate the relation between private sector and the government or the service provider, except sometimes contractual documents, contracts, either service contract or BBB or BOT or concession contracts. And this sometimes lead to, this is my point of view, the contractual arrangement only without regulation that can really regulate the relation. It can be somehow seen as there is window for balloons and corruption or whatsoever, and it could lead that the services are not affordable. So in the Union for the Mediterranean effort, as an example, let me be from the sector that I used to manage before, only the water. We saw that this big investment on desalination, on wastewater treatment plant, which is the two things, the desalination and the reuse are the answer for the lack of more water resources in the Mediterranean. They are a huge investment. And in case you don't bring the private sector into the process, not only to construct and go, but in a formula that BOT or BOO or whatsoever, then we cannot have the facility and the investment that need to enable us to reach the demand and the supply that goes to different sector, either the industrial or domestic or the agricultural sector. And we found that this need to be tackled from the fundamentals. The fundamentals start from the laws that regulate different sectors. But we have done it on a very proper way. Like we commissioned the OECD, we commissioned many other actors in order to run this water governance and financing program in the Mediterranean. We went for 5 countries, we replicate, and the recommendation is to make reform. And the reform, this is the issue. The policy influence that we are doing in the environment or water, they are time consuming. You cannot assess, like to start a process today and after 1 year we say, achieve. So if we want to follow result-based management approach, we need to wait 3 years at least in case you want to do a law that is respecting the democracy. You can't do a law by dictatorship and throw it and that's it. But if you want to engage and stakeholder with you and to protect the local laws and the local traditional action and to protect also the minority, then you need to do it in a proper way where you consult. And, but at the same time, we found that the issue of commercialization of the sector is very important in order to draw a unique relation between the private sector and the utility or the government here. Because the government has the social contract to give not only water or good environment or enhancing socio-economic reality in any price. The most important thing that this should be sustainable and affordable, because if we can produce water with 10 euro, nobody will buy it, nobody will be in it. So the work starts from enhancing these laws, regulation, in order to enhance the self-revenue of these sectors, and this money of water should be spent on water. Money for environment should be spent on environment. I should not mix. So that cannot be done if you keep everything with the public sector. So the starting point is there. There are some examples we identify 5 countries in the financial strategy as an example. Among them, Spain was one of them, that they managed to put a good framework for the relation with the private sector in this infrastructure. And we start bringing in-depth and peer review, going to Jordan, to Albania, and make these toward sustainable environment or water, blue economy sectors. When it comes to the blue economy sector, the ministerial declaration on blue economy this year has given also a very important impulse to the relation with the private sector, because when you talk about the port and how to make the port more ecological and environment friendly, here you need to mobilize technology and you need to mobilize a lot of investment. So in order to bring them around the table and to contribute, you have to build incentive-based approach. So now the UFM Secretariat with partners like EIB, EBRD, they are looking to pave the road toward establishing something we call it Mediterranean Blue Partnership, which will work as enabler and give some technical capacity in order that the private sector come to invest on list of projects that had been also identified. The study was just finalized last week on the market analysis and where are the opportunity, and the study had been conducted in Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, and Jordan. So we have a list of projects that count billions. So the partnership between the government and the private sector will take place hopefully soon. I don't know, we are waiting some support from different ministries like Spanish Ministry of Ecology, other ministries. So we hope that this will give a new momentum for engaging the private sector on the most important and cautious way also. And the most important part that you need to build the win-win. If the private sector, they cannot invest if they don't see the profit. The last thing, the private sector also they are the owner of factory that pollute. So we should also apply what we call it the PPP, not public-private partnership here. We have to do the other PPP, polluter pay principle, and they have to comply to these. And this is how I see that the legally binding aspects at regional level mean nothing in case they were not reflected on the national regulation on individual country. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr.
I
Abaji.
am talkative.
Sorry, I am running out of time, Elias, and I know that people would also want to have questions. I think I like the panel in that it really sparked some conversation. I have a lot of follow-up questions. I'm sure others want to share other examples and so on. And I hope that as we move towards lunch and the afternoon reception that we will have in the Botanical Garden, it's going to be an opportunity for us to exchange. I like the polluter pay principle because it's something that we started within the environmental movement and that we kind of left a little bit, and now we're coming back to it also in the climate change arena. So there was a lot said in this panel, and each notion could be unpacked in itself. So I want to give you and I'll start this way, from Nizar backwards, because this is how we started at the beginning. I want to give you your take-home messages in less than a minute.
Before we start with my recommendation, as a vice chair of WCPA, I will invite every one of the people here who are connected to protected area to be involved in the work of WCPA. Really, there is a huge momentum, different focus groups, different thematic groups. We encourage all of you to be involved. My recommendation, Iman, coming back to the local perspective. In those 2 days, we were talking with the more experienced people here, and we were evaluating a little bit since 1992 till now. In my opinion, we did well on the international level. We did good on the regional level. Now every single country, they have the National Biodiversity Action Plan and the State of Biodiversity and all that. But we're still missing the local level. So my recommendation is to focus in the coming 10 years, as our colleagues said, to build the capacities of the locals, local authorities, local communities, local institutions, really to be able to continue this huge efforts that has been started in 1992 till now. Thank you.
Thanks, Nizar. I think that's straight to the point. Susanna, can you do any better?
Yes.
Straight to the point.
I don't know if I can do better. I will try to keep brief my final comments. But yes, in line with what you said, I also think that we need to keep that in mind, the local and the global, and certainly the legal and the technical and the field work. And in my view, we would be doing well if we replicate success stories. The IUCN work is a very important one. The work of each of our organizations and the work of the countries is very important. The political will is, a condition to move forward, but we also need the real willingness to put means where they are needed. Because, as you said at the beginning, we have the instruments, we have the political will, but then we don't have the means to pursue the work that is needed. And I give you the example of ACABAMS with this assessment and huge, large survey that has been implemented, which constitutes a baseline to understand future trends in terms of abundance of cetaceans. But if we don't do more, we won't know. And so cetaceans are good indicators of what the future will be. Thank you.
Thanks. So I'll take the local level, replicate success, and put your money where your mouth is. Elias.
Thank you. And before going to my final comments, just to say on the private sector that since we are not only a legally binding instrument, we have developed the Sustainable Business Award as an incentive, but we also have guidelines adopted by the contracting parties on green products and sustainable businesses. So this is really important. It's a new stream of work. Now, regarding my final comments, first of all, I would say that, as I said in the beginning, and as I understand comes out from all the interventions, what we need to move now is implementation in the ground and enforcement. To do that, the obligation I think that we have as regional frameworks, all of us, is to work in partnership and in complementarity. And complementarity, I mean also in how we provide resources, resource allocation, but also the requests, the reporting, and other burden that we put on countries. What we also need to do is capacity building. It's to build capacity both at the institutional level, but also at the individual level, at the national and the local levels that were mentioned before. And my last point, which we didn't have the time to elaborate, is to have these capacities and this work really providing fruits on the ground, we need coordination at the national level. So countries need to work, individual within countries, institutions, ministries need to work, and the NGOs in the countries need to work hand in hand to best benefit of what we can offer, but also to comply with their obligations. And I think that now, after the COVID, especially digitalization is a very useful tool for them to support them on this. Thank you.
Thanks. I am taking notes. I can see some clusters forming. So I'll pass on to you, Mr. Abadi.
Thank you very much. Just in 3 words, we have to enhance the resilience of local community through adopting the sustainable consumption and production models that will minimize the effect on the biodiversity loss. The second one, we have to implement not only, we have not conservation. We have to also focus on the restoration of the marine life and also the protected area, and to start from the land, you protect the sea and the vice versa. The second element, I support all elements had been done, including the building partnership, but the most important thing that is needed is the time to start doing the whole government approach. The whole government approach is not to set up a ministerial committee on something, like 3-4 ministers. The whole government approach should be translated into the regulation, into the laws that governs those sectors that should be working together on a very coherent and coordinated approach. The role of the civil society is shy in the part of this region, so we need to enhance their role by capacitating them. Capacity building is very important. Even I have some other option that many people were subject to capacity building, and then they become a brain of a drain or whatsoever. You capacitate utility, and then you go next year, you find nothing. They join the World Bank or join the other. So this is something that we have to work on. And the last point is investment. We have to create a conducive and inclusive investment mechanism in the Mediterranean. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Abadi. Madame Zuhur. We're switching to French.
Merci, j'écris pour ne pas oublier. Alors, à l'aube d'une... Ah, d'accord.
¿Empezamos? Yeah.
Alors, à l'aube d'une montée en puissance cruciale de la mobilisation pour la biodiversité à l'échelle mondiale, avec l'objectif affiché d'arriver à protéger durablement 30% de la planète 2022, et face aux nombreux défis pesant sur la Méditerranée, tels que changement climatique, érosion, biodiversité, pollution, pression sur les ressources, etc., à mon sens, il est impératif d'émerger des réflexions et des orientations stratégiques dans les plans de développement nationaux qui se basent sur, essentiellement, la théorie du changement de processus, l'évolution des comportements, le changement des paradigmes dans les secteurs économiques, la prise en compte des nouvelles variables telles que la transition écologique et les investissements verts, dans notamment les solutions fondées sur la nature. Une telle démarche pourrait être très utile et permettrait certainement de s'aligner aux différents cadres régionaux pour la mise en œuvre des projets pilotes innovants et bénéfiques pour la cohabitation homme-nature dans le bassin méditerranéen. Un dernier point, toutefois, il faut réduire les écarts entre les pays, et ce, par un appui technique et financier pour atteindre, bien sûr, les résultats escomptés. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, parce que ce dernier point est important, parce que je pense que les écarts qu'on a en Méditerranée, on doit vraiment essayer de les réduire. Vous avez parlé de transition écologique, et ça me permet de faire la transition au ministère de transition écologique de l'Espagne. Fernando, tienes la palabra.
Gracias. Entonces, mi último mensaje que quiero dar es de transición, desde luego. Estamos en un momento de transición ecológica, incluso diría que social y política, y esto nos va a llevar a un camino seguramente con velocidades diferentes, en diferentes momentos, con momentos más de avance, momentos más de reacción a esa modificación que estamos haciendo en múltiples aspectos, pero también un mensaje de cambio y un mensaje de acción. Si miramos un momento para atrás, hace 20 años, hace 10 y ahora, estamos haciendo acciones tangibles que eran consideradas realmente imposibles hace 2, 3, 4 décadas. Estamos protegiendo áreas marinas con un nivel de intensidad muy elevado, áreas terrestres, creando reservas de la biosfera internacionales, como Marruecos, por ejemplo, haciendo acciones de restauración de humedales, de zonas costeras, de bosques, de zonas agrarias, sistemas que no han visto en el pasado acciones de restauración y de conservación tales como las que estamos viendo ahora. Incluso planteando recuperación de praderas marinas, en fin, cuestiones que nos hacen entender que a pesar de las transiciones y de lo que eso supone de reacción, de cambio, de amenazas, de desafíos, hay una posibilidad real de actuar, que no hay excusas para no actuar y que solamente cooperando con conocimiento y confianza daremos ese brinco, ese salto hacia la acción que es imprescindible a la vista del deterioro en conservación que tenemos y que además UICN, digamos, abandera en ese mensaje de que es posible, es real y es factible actuar en esa mejora.
Muchas gracias, Fernando. I'm sorry, I will switch to English for closing. No, ¿sabes qué? Lo voy a hacer en español. Estamos en España y vamos a hablar en español. Muy bien, Sonia. No pienso resumir estos últimos puntos, pero yo creo que nos dan un roadmap que está excelente. Hemos escuchado mucho. Les invito a que interactúen con nuestros panelistas y, por favor, que les aplaudimos por este panel. Gracias.
Iman, I will not say something related to this.
He's always a troublemaker, but that's okay.
I have a request from the IUCN National Committee in Lebanon. There is a little appreciation for you, for the whole work that you are doing on the different levels. I will ask Mr. Fadi Ghanem to come here. Mrs. Asad. Yeah.
Okay, let's go.
Okay, do not forget to return them, please, because if not, IUCN is going to pay a hell of a lot of money. Thank you very much.
Please, one kind reminder. Now you have free time for your lunch and enjoy this wonderful city. But at 4, you have the chance to take the bus to go to the Botanical Garden. The bus is nearby the NH Hotel, okay, at 4. Just this reminder. The French translation. Nous avons les bus disponibles à 4 heures à côté de l'hôtel NH. OK? Vous pouvez profiter de la ville, que c'est une ville très jolie, et profiter de déjeuner. À bientôt. À l'hôtel, si vous voulez. Si.
Félicitations, Madame la Secrétaire.